Good morning. Before I start this speech, I would like to put out a content warning, with themes of childhood rape and sexual assault being mentioned in my case study. If these themes are triggering in any way, I'll advise you when to mute my sound. For those that don't know me, my name is Zali. I'm currently 20 years old and I live and work within Western Sydney. If you were to ask my parents to describe me growing up, they'll say I was always a fighter. Although I physically have a black belt in martial arts, I think for me the fighter they speak of is more centered around my passion for being a voice, an advocate, and a fighter for those of marginalized groups, for women's rights and injustices within society. This desire to strive for equality and actively trying to make a difference is one of the main reasons I was so drawn to the midwifery profession in the first place. This interest in midwifery only grew more during my senior years of schooling, in which I studied visual arts. Here I learned more deeply about how bodily autonomy continues to be removed during childbirth, and despite how empowering having a baby may be for many, birth trauma and obstetric violence still occurs. This learning experience solidified that midwifery was the career path for me, as it combined so many of my interests and so clearly highlighted that birth was and still is a forgotten feminist issue. Since then, and a few too many binges of Grey's Anatomy later, I commenced my Bachelor of Midwifery with the hope to be a midwife who always amplified the voices of the women I cared for, and a practitioner who would not stand for the disempowerment and violation of women and their bodies during the childbirth experience. Commencing my clinical placement at Westmead Hospital in 2019, I came in with the goal to always try to stick to my midwifery philosophy of being a practitioner who is woman-centered, culturally safe, and evidence-based. Sadly, I was welcomed into a hospital that, despite its best efforts to provide women with holistic, physiological, and empowering birthing experiences, had become an institution with a disunited vision. With Westmead being the biggest referral hospital for high-risk and complex pregnancies, women are often quickly pathologized and their right to autonomous decision-making stripped. This medicalization is not only reserved for women deemed as high risk, but felt by all women that are cared for. Although this one-size-fits-all approach to care is institutionalised amongst many hospitals in New South Wales, the real problem lies with maternity staff who perpetuate this culture by accepting it as normal, allowing it to go unchallenged. As I neared the end of my first year, I came to the realisation that I too had unintentionally contributed to this culture at Westmead. In this moment, I decided that I needed to do better, both directly in the way I treat the women I care for and by calling out mistreatment caused by my colleagues. This has and will continue to be a core learning experience for me as I try to navigate a system that is so resistant to change. Let me introduce you to Natalie. She was a follow-through woman I cared for during my first year of midwifery. She was the catalyst for change for me, and the learning experience I had following her case will stay with me for the remainder of my midwifery career. I met Nat at her 14-week booking an appointment in her family home. She's a G2P1 and had had a normal vaginal birth for her first baby 2 years prior. Her serology and scans all came back normal and remained low risk throughout her pregnancy. Her Edinburgh Depression Scale was low risk, and social screening showed no history or current domestic or family violence. Her pregnancy progressed smoothly and remained relatively uneventful. Natalie reached 41 weeks gestation. However, unfortunately, after slow progress in labour and a prolonged bradycardia, the decision was made for a Category 1 caesarean section. The proceedings were standard. Natalie was wheeled over to the operating theatre, her partner waiting in the anaesthetic bay. Her spinal was topped up and the drapes hung. Their obstetrics team were present. Among them were 2 first-year regs, and leading their team was the consultant and department head of obstetrics. What happened next was not something that wasn't standard procedure, but the image and the ramifications will leave a lasting image in my mind forever. The consultant undertook a vaginal examination. No words were muttered to Natalie. It was rough and looked painful. The other 2 registrars proceeded to do their own vaginal examination. No consent was gained, nor were their findings relayed to Natalie. I looked away, and at the same time my midwife looked at me. An unspoken understanding between us that what we just saw was disgusting. Despite this, neither of us spoke up. The caesarean continued, and a baby boy was announced to the room. I visited Natalie the following day in the maternity ward, and she looked deflated. Upon asking how she felt following the birth, she burst into tears. I held her hand as she recounted how from the ages of 14 to 17, her uncle and his friends would sexually assault and rape her. She stated that when she was on that operating table and the doctors took turns examining her, it brought her right back in time to her adolescence. She felt violated, not in control and invisible. I was angry at Natalie's past abusers, angry at the doctors and the accepted culture within our hospital that consent wasn't required if the woman had adequate pain relief on board. Out of all the people, I was appalled at myself. I was the one who had failed Natalie. I had the power to say something in that operating room that could have changed the whole trajectory of events. Following this encounter, I kept asking myself, if I had known about Natalie's past trauma, would it have been enough for me to stand up for her in that operating theatre? In retrospect, it's easy for me to think I would, but as a first-year midwifery student, I was petrified of questioning the doctors, let alone the head consultant. The sickening thing was, it was not the first time I had seen obstetricians do vaginal examinations without consent in operating theatres. This was a deep-rooted, accepted culture amongst doctors, and midwives I had worked with previously never challenged this issue, so I too turned a blind eye. It took seeing the direct ramifications of Natalie's trauma to immediately change my practice forever, as it shone a light on the importance of trauma-informed maternity care. This meaning that it should not take a woman disclosing previous trauma in order for her to have access to care that is sensitive to her needs. Special treatment should be given to every woman that comes into contact with the maternity sector and must be consensual, respectful, and protect human dignity and anatomy. I now implement this daily when interacting with women by gaining verbal, informed consent before undertaking any procedures, and in order for it to be informed, I articulate to women that the reasoning behind our actions and reinforce that they can decline any treatment. Not gaining consent is a form of birth violence, and it must be stopped. Despite knowing this, I still find calling out my colleagues a daunting and scary thing to do. To overcome this, I have implemented a mechanism that assists in remaining polite and professional while still advocating for women. Instead of standing back and allowing space for doctors to do their examinations, I now stand close by and verbalize to the woman if it would be okay for the doctor to do the examination. This simple strategy returns the power back to the woman, allowing her to decide whether she wants the examination to be completed. In addition, it forces doctors to stop and think of their next action. It is my hope that by actively seeking consent, regardless of who is performing the procedure, it could be enough for that colleague to reflect on their own behaviours and make a change within themselves. For my new graduate year, I plan to remain at Westmead Hospital and rotate through the antenatal clinic, birth unit, women's health ward, and maternity ward. I hope that I can continue to be a voice for the women I care for and actively try to make a difference as my confidence and midwifery skills continue to grow. As for my future, I hope to soon after my new graduate year commence work within a caseload model of care, with the hopes to grow a program specifically designed for rainbow families. Respectful and inclusive access to healthcare for the LGBTQI+ community is the area that is extremely close to my heart. I believe that a caseload model is drastically needed in order to improve the health outcomes for rainbow families, with the current heteronormative maternity system creating enormous barriers for queer individuals to have access to care that is respectful and welcoming. Through having a team of midwives who are members of the LGBTQI+ community or who have diversity training, it removes these barriers and hopefully can contribute to less homophobia and discrimination in the healthcare system. As I near my new graduate year, this peak learning experience will always stay with me, and I hope that I can act on my promise to never accept a culture of violence, no matter how big or small it may seem. I will continue to be a woman-centered practitioner and strive that each woman I care for has informed, holistic, and consensual care. One area I would like to grow on is finding the courage to speak up more directly to my colleagues when I see violations occur. This will take time, as I'm not a confrontational person, but I hope that as my confidence grows, I'll be able to challenge this institutionalized behavior so that no woman is left feeling violated, powerless, nor silenced following her birthing journey. An article that stood out to me during my research for this assignment was Elliston Kingma's work, Harming One to Benefit Another, the paradox of autonomy and consent in maternity care. The article articulates that given the current climate of the world following the #MeToo movement, many changes to workplaces, policies, and individual ideologies have been challenged for the better in regards to consent. Kinga contrasts this to the current maternity system, in which women are left feeling dehumanized and objectified following their birth. Kinga put it simply, vaginas are not knees or a broken arm. They are sensitive and private areas of women's anatomy. As health professionals who look at, manipulate, invade, and in some cases cut these body parts, we must recognize that these actions have broader social significance, which makes for an additional layer of complexity and risk. Kinga goes on to point out that globally, 35% of women have been physically and/or sexually abused or raped. This figure is astronomical to me, and Kinga agrees, stressing that with such high rates globally, the maternity system must treat all women as if they have undisclosed history of sexual assault or rape. Therefore, as I near my new graduate year, I will not stop fighting until all women can enter their pregnancy, labor and birth, educated, listened to, and heard. No woman should enter birth and have their bodily autonomy removed. Too many women are left feeling violated and traumatized after birth. No woman should be touched without consent, nor should the care she received be governed by fear of litigation. We must do better. Here's to strong women. May we know them. May we be them. May we raise them. Thank you.